Sarah Alborg. Is that the right way to say that, your last
Yeah,
name?
it's a strange word. It's called Aalborg.
Oh, you don't
Yeah,
even
and
pronounce the G.
I told you previously that I had 6 months living in New York, and they always called me Elbow. I don't know if that makes it much better. Yeah, so don't mind.
That's good.
Don't, it doesn't matter. Yeah,
Albo.
I know what you
Okay.
mean. Yeah.
Um, Good. Well, yeah. So Sarah is a CISO at Tivoli, the famous uh, theme park that's in the middle of Copenhagen, which I had the pleasure of seeing one time, a long time ago, and also very active in coaching and training on basically security, how to run security organizations and how to run security, kind of human-centric security programs. And Sarah just published, you just were about to publish, but just finished and submitted for publication. Has the book actually come out?
Well, it's I'm awaiting the box that's gonna come, within days with the
Yeah.
physical, the first physical evidence that I actually wrote a book.
Okay.
So within days, it will be out. Yeah.
Awesome. Amazing. So, yeah, I caught myself in saying that Sarah just published a book, but then I
Yeah.
remember you saying that it wasn't quite yet in your hands. So,
No,
we're
yeah. I
really
need it,
in that.
and I need to feel it to see, so,
Yeah.
to have that physical evidence that it's out there before I'm able to say it's been published. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and that's the thing about the book, isn't it? It's very tactile and it's physical, and yes, and
Yes,
um,
exactly.
yeah, yeah. No, it's a piece of work that you can manifest. So we're kind of in that super interesting time where the book has been completed, but it's about to drop and be available. Um, so the book is called Secure by Choice,
Yes.
which is an interesting choice of title. And so maybe Sarah, we can start with you kind of talking about why the title, what the emphasis of the book is,
Yeah.
what it is.
I would love to. I would love to get the chance. So, secure by choice is kind of like a combination of two things. First of all, it's because I firmly believe that to be secure is something that you choose. It's not something that just accidentally happens. It's something that you have to choose and you have to make an effort. So, and that's kind of like one part of it. And then the other part is that when I'm working with my background as a behavioral designer, I'm working very much with something that we call choice architecture, because everything we do in our daily day is choices. There's studies showing that actually a standard human being makes between 30,000 and 35,000 choices every day. And then maybe the listeners out there say, oh, not me. But that's because our subconscious brain makes 9 out of 10 of those choices. So when we're working with a choice architecture, we're working on, having those choices, those subconscious choices being the choices that we would like people to make. And when it comes to security choices, like should I press that link? Should I send this thing without, encryption or stuff like that? It's also a choice. So we have to create the choice architecture around the security settings in a way that helps people and motivates them to make the right choices. So that is why secure by choice is also, a relevant title.
Hmm.
So,
Makes sense.
mhm.
Um, and is this so actually in terms of uh, choice architecture
Mhm.
and some of the recent conversations that you and I have had about biases, how do the two subjects relate? Like,
Yeah, but it works perfectly well because all of these choices are made by our subconscious brain. 9 out of 10 of about the choices that we make in a day is kind of like the rational brain, well thought decisions. But the rest of this is made by our subconscious brain, and our subconscious brain runs mainly on what I call the little apps, those little pre-programmings that are made in our brain through history all the way since Stone Ages. We've had these little apps that are called cognitive biases. And all of these biases I like these little shortcuts or these little pre-programmings that helps the brain make fast decisions or make fast choices. So, so all of the choices that we are making on a daily basis are very much dependent on our biases. So we have both biases, which are kind of like ingrained pre-programmings that the brain uses, and then we have the heuristics that are kind of like things that we've learned through time or through our growing up. So to know how people out there make their decisions, we need to look into these biases. And this is basically what this book is about. It's about all the biases that we have. I think I've had included like 20 different biases that we have that are actually on a daily basis influencing our security decisions or security choices. But where we used to, there has been a lot of discussions about this through since the last, 10 years. And Perry Carpenter has made some great books on this matter, on how our colleagues in the organization are making their security habits dependent on their biases. But my book is more like, okay, so how do my biases as a security professional affect my work? So how do my biases affect my risk assessments? How do they affect the way I work with compliance? How do they affect the way I communicate? And also when it comes to contingency planning, how am I affected by my biases when I'm in a crisis? And this book has been, is it kind of like the product of all my curiosity on these matters and how I've looked into studies, and I've read, tons of books and 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 taken courses on the biases and how they affect us, just because of my curiosity. And then I was like, I'm going to write this book that I would have loved to read when I started my journey. So it's kind of like, that was kind of like the idea with the book, was to write this book that I would have liked to read myself. So on biases, and in, it has, I'm using all of the things that I like myself. I have a background as a librarian. My education is a librarian, so this thing with the books has always been in my it's something that I'm very fond of. And I've always, if I'm going to write a book, I'm going to make it interesting, and I'm going to make it fun to read, and I'm going to make it something that you would, it's supposed to be a book that you want to open and read and feel, absorbed about, and for easy attainable information. So it's full of like little storytelling. It's full of anecdotes and full of quirky titles like The Invisible Gorilla, and How to Tame the Paper Tiger, and about colorblind elephants and ice bears. It has all kinds of funny little things that will help you as a reader not be bored, hopefully. That's my goal.
Well, a lot of exotic animals, that certainly helps. And well,
It's Sarah Sue.
and it kind of gives, I guess, the reader a lexicon of reference points that you can then
Hopefully.
use and say, oh, this is the gorilla coming out, or something like that, right?
Yes, and some of the things that I've, with this book, I've taken all kinds of inspiration from other disciplines. So I've taken, I've had like, I have almost 20, 30 years of experience within IT and IT security. And I've added to that the whole thing about communication, the whole thing about change management, and social sciences and behavioral sciences, and that. But I've also looking very much into didactical sciences, the teachings of how we learn. So one of the things that we learn about is, when we have these little anchors that we can place our knowledge on. So these little animals works like those anchors that, when I tell you that my chapter on risk management is about invisible gorillas, you can't relate to that until you've read the chapter, but after that you will always have that reference for that knowledge. So and this is kind of like an example of what the book's full of, kind of like little ideas for how you can help the people in your organization also attain knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah. So once you see that invisible gorilla, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can start using it as a reference. That's very cool. In terms of the biases that are out there, and I actually am not much of a scholar on the topic beyond having tried to read Thinking Fast and Slow. Um, not getting all the way through it, to be honest. But I understand that there are something like over 100 biases that
There are,
human beings have.
yeah,
And I don't know if that's what the right number is, but how many biases are there, and how many
but
of them are relevant in the security function?
I think that there are more, right now there are mapped more than 300 biases. But,
Oh, okay.
and and then they have that, then they are kind of like sub varieties of another bias, and and they're finding new biases all the time. And it's a field that is developing really, really fast. So I might not even be, on time with all of this. But what I've
Mm,
done is that I've looked into these 20 biases that I can relate to, that I can, I can see in my work, that I can see that we could benefit from knowing. So I've, looked at all of those, and then I've, kind of like deducted which of those would I find beneficial to know about. So
I
that's
see.
kind of like the work I've done. So I have like a bias uh, that I find scary, and that is actually the bias that when this guy that have written the book Thinking Fast and Slow, it's called Kahneman. And Kahneman, he actually won the Nobel Prize in behavioral economy. And he said, he was once asked about the most scary bias of them all, and he says overconfidence bias. And I fully agree. And the
Mm,
funny thing about an overconfidence bias is that we all have it. And it's about how we tend to overestimate our own abilities. So there's a study showing that more than 70% of people in Sweden believe they're better at driving their car than average. More than 80% of people at a university in the US, I don't recall the name of that, but they did a survey and they estimated that 80% of them estimated that they were better at teaching than average. It's something that we all have. And can you, when you translate that to cyber and to security, if we all believe we're better at securing ourselves than average, how can
mm,
that affect our our security settings? If we think that we're better at, responding to incidents than average, how does that affect our incitement to, to do training these processes? And it's all over the place. And about risks, if we believe that we are better secured than the other organizations, how does that put us when it comes to hack attacks? So it's really dangerous for us, and it can really skew our risk assessments. Then we have another bias called optimism bias that makes us believe that the most positive outcome of a situation is the most likely one. So when we're doing risk assessments, if we subconsciously believe that the most positive outcome is the most realistic one, then something's wrong. Something can, it can skew our risk assessments. And we have all these biases that affect us. We have a close cousin to confidence bias called curse of knowledge.
mm,
Curse of knowledge is about how we believe that the recipient, the people out there, have the same view of the world that we do. They
mhm.
have the same understanding of the world as we do. They have the same terminology. So when we are speaking techity tech and abbreviations, that we believe that people out there, of course, they will understand us, and they probably don't. They might even have dyslexia. So
Yep.
our curse of knowledge is so scary when it comes to this whole security awareness or security communication field, because I hate the word awareness. So, security communication is a skill that is something that we will see develop or be trending in the years to come. I'm absolutely sure.
Yeah, these biases certainly paint a bleak picture. And it reminds me of like some of the research that we've done on our data set at OutThink. 4 million users, we analyze the data once in a while. At least we started about a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the interesting data points in there was the large proportion of people who, because we measure intent, the intention to comply with the
Yeah.
whatever the policy is that is being communicated. So the intention to comply being high, but the knowledge level of that policy being low,
Yeah.
and that kind of spells like a empirical evidence, at least within the user base, of overconfidence. But because and those are probably the riskiest users, right? Because they're like, oh yeah, I'm going to comply, no problem, but they don't really know what they're trying to comply with, right?
No, not at
um,
all.
but how do you like, yeah, when you get into the management of a large security team in a large enterprise, um, some of these leaders are by nature overconfident. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
we all
how do
are.
you, we well, and apparently, yes, apparently statistically we all are, but how do you go and tell the leadership of the organization that there's such a bias and you are uh, ailing from this bias yourselves? I mean, that's got to be a hard message to send. Like, is there a way for someone who sees this within the organization to explain that
I
to the
think that
leadership?
I'm trying to do is not to tell people they're biased, because it somehow it comes off wrong, but I like to advocate for looking at data and looking at baselines and
Yes.
looking at breach reports. So look at what's happening out there. Look at security incidents. Look at your own security incidents that you have in your organization. Look at these kind of like when you have a process that people have to comply with. Look at how compliant are they, and
Mm-hmm.
look at data rather than telling people that they're biased, because um, it's it's an uphill battle to be honest. But I think that when I'm talking to people, most of them agree that yes, we are all biased, because that's kind of like a thing at the moment. You just have to look at your regular teenager. At least in Denmark, they're all, oh, I'm so biased. And they all are. And now we're talking AI, and we're also talking about how the AI is biased, and that this whole diversity thing. So there's a common understanding that we are biased, but there's not until now yet. Hopefully, it's kind of like my motivation is that this realization that we are biased as security professionals.
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
we all think that we are very rational, but we aren't. So that's kind of like my idea with this book, is to look at ourselves and point the lens that we've pointed at our users, and why do they click these links. It's because they're biased, and we've been talking about that. Point that lens towards ourselves and saying, okay, what does it mean for me to be a security professional, but also being just a human being? How does it affect my work?
Yeah. And
and
I
and,
think
and
you're
yeah.
yeah, I think you're right that the awareness of biases and how prevalent they are for all of us
Mm-hmm.
has risen a great
Yeah.
deal in the last few years. So I think that people are naturally going to be more receptive to, okay, yeah, we have biases. So which ones are the ones that are the most impactful for me to know about? So perhaps there is perhaps an open door that you're pushing against.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah,
So,
more than before.
also when I tell people about complexity bias, it's also a very good bias to talk about, because complexity bias is something that we all know or can relate to. So if you start up by telling people about some biases that are kind of like not that hurtful to know about, we all have complexity bias, and I certainly do. So when you tell them about a bias that is so understandable as complexity bias, because this is about our brain wants to save energy, wants to avoid complexity, because it doesn't want to spend all of that effort understanding complex situations or complex texts. Or this is why information security management system, ISMSs, and that whole thing, and the procedures and the politics is hardly ever read. It's because they're far too complex, and people just can't cope with it, and they will just skip it. So when you tell people about a complexity bias, then they agree, yes, I fully understand that feeling of having to do something that's really complex, and my brain just wants to do all kinds of little procrastinations because I don't want to do it, like the yearly tax thing or whatever. And
Oh yeah,
when we can all relate to that, and then you can kind of like guide that discussion into other kind of biases and how they affect you. But
right.
complexity bias is something that I see there's so much potential within information security just by working with that one bias, the complexity bias, with ourselves and with our colleagues out there.
And so would you say that is that like if you're going to go through the 20 some odd biases that are relevant in a security team, would you like if you're working with another, let's say a new organization, and you're advising them what to do, would you try to assess which bias has the most impact on them? Or would you just kind of start with the lowest hanging fruit? And I don't know what that is. Maybe it's that complexity bias, and say like, this is the one that we really need to start with because it's the easiest to address.
Yeah, a complexity bias is always a good one to start with. But I've developed kind of like 3 principles that I tell the organizations, and when I work with people and I work with the compliance, or I work with rolling out kind of any security solution or anything, then I'm working with complexity bias in a way that I have 3 principles that I work with. The first one is called simple secure, actually targeting complexity bias, because simple secure is that for anything we do within our area, we have to look at, can I make this simpler? Is there anything I can take away? Is there anything I can take away from this process? If it has like 7 bullets, can I make it into only 5? If I have, like a lot of security controls, if I have like 114 controls, could we make it into just being 90? Is there any way I can lessen the complexity in my text? You can actually ask any AI about the complexity of your text, and you can make it simpler. Ask the AI to make it simpler and easier to read. So is there any way I can simplify anything that I do when I'm rolling out the solution? That's the first principle that I use in anything I do. Then I have another principle that's called, if you can't explain, it will be in vain. So if you can't explain exactly what people have to do to comply or to use this solution or whatever you do, and why, then you haven't done your homework. So people have to be able to understand what it is you want them to do. That's the first priority. And the second is why. So, for example, when you're working if you're working with an ISO standard or something, then you would roll out security controls. You have to review user and access review every 6 months or whatever. And if you can't, from that control, see the exact risk that this is mitigating, how can you ask people to do it? So if you can't tell them why they have to do it, how can you ask them to do it? And how do they feel the incentive to do it? So if you can't explain, it will be in vain. If you can't explain why you want people to have a certain behavior, or why you need to implement this tool, then how can you?
So you're saying it's not enough to say the what. You have to
No.
actually say why this is.
Yeah. And there's a great books about why by Simon Sinek. If people want to look into that, it's really good. And the last one is called Mind Your Language. And, I'm pointing fingers here like a mother saying, mind your language, because language is so important when you want people to adapt a behavior or a new solution, because you have to have a positive language. If you have a negative language, then we have in our brain, we have little neurons called mirror neurons, and they will mirror the sentiment that the message is sent with. So if it's a negative laden, you can't do this, or stop doing that, or this is not allowed, it's a negative sentiment. And the brain will think about the action or the behavior that you want in negative terms. So you have to use, you have to do this, like a positive behavioral guiding wording. And also about your mind language is about the complexity again, because the brain will subconsciously translate a complex process into a complex task. And knowing that the brain wants to save energy and avoid complexity, then they will avoid doing whatever you're asking them to if it's believed to be complex. And there's also a thing about how do you compose your sentences, because our brain and the short-term memory, if we have these long I call it juridical lingo. I have a speak that I have once in a while say called why you shouldn't let lawyers write your security policies. It doesn't sound that nice, but it's because that lingo that you use is not written for human brains. It's written for there's so many details in
It's
that.
like
It's
a
so complex.
contract language.
Yeah,
Yeah.
contract language. So you have to put like what the user should do in the front of the sentence instead of saying according to this paragraph and yada yada yada. You have to. When you're in the
Mhm.
end of that sentence, the brain will have forgotten the first part. So you need to put the actionable thing in the beginning of a sentence. So little things like that is so important when you communicate these things, but we don't think about it.
Is there a name for? No, totally agreed. This makes total sense. I totally understand what you're saying. Is there a name for the tendency for some people, perhaps all of us, to over complexify concepts in order to sound smarter than, or to sound like we bring more value, you know,
Yeah, and we
than
do have that tendency. I don't know the name for that, but we all have a tendency, but first of all, to use the technical lingo that is common within our sphere, but also to use, the abbreviations and everything in order to feel good about it and to feel smarter than everyone else. But when it comes to communication, it backfires
mm,
because people won't understand a word, and then you won't have communicated because they don't understand what you're saying.
yeah,
So
because
this
in
is
some ways, if you
yeah,
make it sound so simple, then it's like, well, oh, okay, is that all you do? Is that all you're
yeah,
really bringing to the table
but
here,
it's
Mr.
but to
Security?
to be able to make a very simple, understandable design, it actually takes so much more time than to do a complex thing,
True.
because
A lot of work.
it's everyone who works with communication knows that the easy, simple communication is the hardest one. And there was this French guy called Saint Exupéry, I think. I don't know how to
Exupery?
pronounce
Oh,
that,
the Little
but
Prince guy.
he says that the best design is not when there's nothing more to add. It's when there's nothing more to remove. So we always have to try to remove stuff from our communications or from our solutions. Make it as simple as possible because then it will be brain friendly and
Brain
also for
friendly. I
ourselves.
like that.
Yeah, I think we need more brain friendly security,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah. That's a great bumper sticker. Brain friendly security.
Yeah,
Love that.
yeah, and also we have this idea that knowledge equals action, but it doesn't. We
Hmm.
think that when we tell people something, they will do something. We have this idea that people are rational. And looking back at those 30,000 decisions every day made by where the most part of it is done by our subconscious brain, we're not at all rational. So knowledge doesn't equal action. It's just So when we're looking at security awareness, I had a LinkedIn post once that went kind of viral because I wrote that security awareness must die. But awareness isn't something that will change actions.
Right.
I'm aware that we need to do something drastical about our environment. And I know that things can go really bad if we don't, stop flying or mind the environment. But that knowledge doesn't, prevent me from going flying every year or because I want to see family or whatever. And I also know, we all know that in the world today, more people die from obesity than they die from hunger or starvation. We all
Hmm.
know that it, to eat that crappy food or all that sugar or whatever is bad for our health, and it can cause great danger to us, but we still do it. So knowledge isn't a game changer for changing people's behavior. We need
Yeah.
something more.
But what is it that, so I agree with you, by the
Yeah,
way, and we see this, and this is the reason for cybersecurity, human risk management, and like really changing the game from
yeah,
basic awareness. So that's kind of the premise behind everything that we're doing at OutThink, and a lot of people in the new industry, the new kind of um, evolution of awareness. But what is it, like in the obesity example, sugar is just so good, isn't it? Right? It's
Yes.
compelling. It's so hard to put it down and not have it, right? And then with flying, that example, you want to see your family. Like there's nothing like actually physically being in the same room with somebody that you're close to.
Exactly.
You want to do that. But with security, what is it that makes us, like that creates that gap between knowledge, awareness, and secure behavior? What do you think it is?
I think it's that subconscious brain of ours that does whatever it's pre-programmed. So I have another speak that I do that is called the road to secure behavior starts in the Stone Age, because in the Stone Age, when you look at the brain evolution, I have this I have a imaginary calendar. So if you kind of like imagine a calendar, one of those big cardboard calendars, 1 by 1 meter, the ones that we used to have in the offices and write each other's birthday. And now came all the GDPR and the personal data, and now we don't think we are allowed anymore. That calendar, imagine one of those calendars, January, February, all of that, with the month. And then let's imagine that this calendar is not, just a full year. It's the brain's evolution. Okay, so the brain evolution, let's start with the great apes, 8 million years ago, but it's 1st of January on this calendar. And then we let time pass on the calendar is the brain evolution. The 31st, New Year's Eve on the 31st in this calendar is now. So let time pass in this calendar, our mental calendar, until January passes, February passes, nothing really interesting happening to the brain's evolution. We are in March, we're in April, nothing happens. We are actually in August, September before something really interesting happened. This is where we see the Homo family with the big brains and the ability to use tools in, as almost 3/4 of the calendar has already passed before something happening.
Right.
Until then,
Right.
we've just been apes in trees, living in nature. And then we let time pass. Sometimes in October, we invent fire, which is good because we are able to roast meat and the brain gets more fat. So there's a lot of brain evolution going on there. And then nothing happens again. We let, November pass in December. 15th of December is where we see something again. Nothing has, happened for all of these months. It's just been pure instinct. And on the 15th of December is where we see kind of like the Stone Age. This is where the brain almost gets stuck in evolution, because our brain today is very much like the brains that we had in the Stone Ages.
Mm-hmm.
People in the Stone Ages looked like you and I, give or take a little bit more hair, furry clothes and stuff, but they looked like you and I, and they had the same sentiments, they had the same emotions, they had the same IQ as we do today. So there's an idea. If you have this comic with Calvin and Hobbes, and then he has the time machine, and if you go back to the Stone Age, and you could actually take a child from the Stone Ages, and it could grow up in a modern family, and it could go to kindergarten, it could go to school, and it could have an education. They had the same, basic brain functions as we do today. Isn't that crazy?
That is.
So we are in this calendar. Now we have the 15th of December, and then we let time pass. On the 25th, Christmas Eve, we see farming. And this is crazy because farming is where we see, people are starting to stay in one place instead of, being hunter-gatherers. And they start, fencing their assets. So you start putting fences because the assets shouldn't leave, cows and pigs and whatever. And very soon after, we see the fences and we see the first signs of wars because people want to take each other's assets. So user and access management starts in the Stone Age, just saying. So then on the 27th, we see the Sumerians invent writing. And this, then it goes fast. In the 30-ish of December, we see the Roman Empire with the structures, with the they had like these concrete roads going through Europe because they had the ability to communicate like 1,000 kilometers away and stuff like that. And I like to say that, you know, in the Stone Age, imagine one of those legionnaires. He's riding his sweaty horse, and he's coming up to this big fort, and he gets off his horse, you know, has these sandals with these, you know, tied around his feet, and he's standing in front of the fort. And you know how he got access into this fort? He used a token and a password. That's the Roman Empire. Isn't that crazy? That's where it all starts. And then, you know, you see, since the Roman Empire, we have one day on this big calendar of the brain evolution, and we have, you know, the Templar Knights with all the encryptions. We have the Middle Age castles with the you know, all of those things. And then on the 31st of December at like 11 p.m. and plus half an hour, that's when we see the first computer. And like, you know, 2 minutes before the, you know, the fireworks and the champagne and everything, that's when we see, you know, internet. That's when we see AI. That's when we see all of these things. But the brain hasn't changed for like 8 million years, you know. And it was the the programmings of, you know, the operating system got stuck in the Stone Age. So there's no reason. Yeah. So
puts things in perspective. Yeah.
Digital dangers aren't, you know, it's been, you know, like a split second of this brain evolution for all our digital things and the cyber, and the brain hasn't caught up, and it won't catch up until, you know, January on the next calendar. So we can't help it. We need to understand these configurations and what happened in the Stone Age, and that throughout that evolution. And what happened is that everything was about surviving. It was about surviving by avoiding physical dangers. Sure, you know, we mentioned that my kids go home from bike in the dark, in pitch dark here in Denmark, go home on bike, and I'm not at all scared. But we all feel that, you know, biking in the dark can be scary, but we give them the iPad and then let them play Roblox. No problem, because our brain is not configured to understand, you know, the digital dangers. And another thing that was really, you know, key to surviving was to save energy in the Stone Ages. So you didn't know where your next meal would come from. And the brain is, you know, 1.3, 1.6 kilos, basically. So for a normal human being. And it actually consists primarily of fat. And the brain is a major fat consuming organ, because it almost 25% of the calories you consume in a day is absorbed by your brain. So avoiding thinking is actually a coping mechanism for your brain to survive in the Stone Age. And eating that sugary food is something that is pre-programmed into you because you want to survive. It's your Stone Age brain telling you that you need this. And there are some guys that's called Dan and Cheap Heath, who took an idea from Jonathan Haidt, saying that it's like these two systems is like the subconscious brain and the rational brain is, you can see it like a big fat elephant is your subconscious brain. And then on top of this elephant, you have a tiny little rider who's rational, who's with a stick. And the rider knows not to eat that cake, you know, when it's in the office in the afternoon and you're all sugar craving. But the elephant doesn't care. The elephant wants to survive, and the elephant does what it's always done. You know, the idea with the elephant's path. Elephants, they remember like crazy. So they just do this as they used to. So whenever I eat that cake, I just blame the elephant.
The invisible elephant.
So what we need to do when we do security, we need to put our efforts at the elephant, because 9 out of 10 choices that people do on a daily basis is done by the elephant.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And it's a great metaphor that you used with the calendar, especially considering it's December 19th and we're all kind of in that mindset of like, oh, what has happened through this year? It's a good metaphor for considering the timing of this conversation. You know, speaking of the elephant and helping the elephant make the right choices, I just want to come back to the topic that you started with in describing your book, which is choice architecture. And I'm kind of conscious we probably don't have so much more time left, but what have you seen any implementations of choice architecture for secure behavior that are successful? And what are some of the first places in kind of that security life cycle, if you will, where people start implementing choice architecture for secure behavior?
Yeah. So what I do is that I've built myself a framework based on all of this knowledge and on all of my experience. So I think that it varies very much between organizations, that you should always have an outset in your risk scenarios that's relevant for your organization. Because if you don't have like confidential information, that's not where you start. If you're very much into operations, so you need to start with your own risk scenarios, and then you need to look at the behavior causing those risk scenarios. So any behavior that adds to a likelihood or adds to a consequence of a risk scenario happening. We could say one of a common thing would be phishing, for example. So when we're working with phishing, is very much adding to the likelihood of a cyber incident. It could also be something that's causing credential harvesting. It could cause data leakage. It's kind of like a starting place for so many risk scenarios. So if we're looking at the behavior causing a risk scenario, then we're looking at what would we rather have people do rather than clicking a link or putting in our credentials. And then when we're looking at what we would rather have people do, we would have them report the phishing email, for example. That's the positive worded action that we wanted to take. And what I do is, this is where what I guide the organizations when I do my security coaching, is to do an analysis and saying, why aren't they doing that today? What is actually the cause that people aren't reporting phishing email? And it could be something with knowledge. They don't know they have to. Then you have to work with your communication. It can be because the process is cumbersome. They have to, some organizations still use the thing that you have to copy the suspicious email and attach it to another email and send it to a certain office and wait for feedback, then it's a cumbersome process, and back to complexity. It's not going to happen. It can be because they don't have the fish reporting button isn't activated. Then it would be about tooling. It could be because in our organization we don't do that. It could be because they are of the belief that this security thing is something that they should take care of in the security department over there somewhere in the basement or whatever. So you see, there can be so many reasons for them not to have the secure behavior. So we can't know about the biases and what I call the frictions for them not to have the secure behavior before we begin, open the box and look what's inside. And first, when we do that, then we can design a solution. So it could be that you should both apply the fish button solution, whatever. You should also communicate to these people that they should actually report. And you should work with the culture about, the common understanding that we are all responsible for this, because everyone can be targeted. It could also be that you should communicate a little bit about, what are we seeing? How much are we in fact targeted? Things are, being caught in our filters. And so you see, there can be all kinds of solutions which will be addressing different biases within these people. So I don't believe you should work bias by bias. I think you should work risk scenario by risk scenario, because that's where we add value. It's when we mitigate those risks or treat those risks. We don't add value just by knowing about biases. The value comes from when the exact initiatives that we do to secure our organizations.
That makes sense. So you look at the different threats or kind of risk scenarios that you're trying to prevent and work through those threats, and then figure out what behaviors you want to have in order to counteract those threats.
Exactly. And that also makes it much more easy to get funding. Because, when I'm with my management and they say, oh, you want to send the help desk for 2 days course? Oh, it's expensive. That's what they always say. Okay. So then they're asking you, what do we get from that? And I can say, okay, these people, they have, they're highly targeted because their phone number is all over the internet. They have the consequence if their credentials are stolen is high because they have the ability to change passwords.
Mm.
So they have these behaviors. We want them to have these behaviors. So this is why I need to train them, because this risk scenario that we have placed up here in our risk matrix, we need to move it down to the green field here.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's the same risk matrix that they used to see when they do their EIM risk management or all kinds of other risk management. So you're using, back to, putting yourself in the user's place where we started with the banjo, you need to understand what they need to understand you, their situation. You need to talk their language. So when I do that and say this risk, so up here it's like in the red field in the risk matrix, I need to move it to the green field. To do so, I need to have this behavior from these people, and I'll do that by this course because my analysis shows that these things are missing from their perception or their ability or whatever. So you can have that, you can follow the risk and the mitigation and the funding, and you put them all together in a way that I find to be a great systematic way of, a structured approach to mitigating those risks that derives from action or not having an action, for example.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And your banjo kind of example about kind of tackling that knowledge bias or curse of knowledge or whatever that,
Mm-hmm.
you think that your exec team who is distributing budget, or your users for that matter, you'd think that they know where you're coming from, but they really don't. And you have to kind of put yourself in their shoes
Yeah.
when you're trying to explain it to them. That makes a lot of sense. All right. Well, we're a little bit over time, but that tends to happen on these calls. But I think this is super interesting, and I'd love to pick into actually the choice architecture around phishing. As you were talking about that, it made me
Mm-hmm.
think of different
Yeah.
potential solutions, but we probably won't have time to go into that
We'll
right
do
now.
that
So
another day.
maybe another day. But hey, so new book, Secure by Choice, coming out any minute now, any day now,
Yes.
I suppose, for the new year, and definitely going to be a must read for 2025. I will pick one up for sure.
Thank
Can't
you.
wait to see it. And thank you for taking the time to talk about this subject, Sarah. It's really
Thanks
been
for
a
having
pleasure.
me.
Yes, and
Thank
perhaps
you.
we'll do another call once I've read the book and have some more detailed questions.
I would love to get the chance. So thanks a lot,
Yes.
Lev.
All right. Thank you. All right. Take care.